Hey guys, Will here. So today is a really exciting day for sim racing. Logitech have just released a brand new tier of sim racing product. Now, as you guys will probably be aware, Fanatec have absolutely dominated the entry to mid-level direct drive market for almost 5 years now since the CSL DD originally released, simply because they've been one of the only ones that has console compatibility across all three platforms. So PlayStation, Xbox, and of course PC. That is set to change with this new range from Logitech, and I'm really excited to check this out. So whether you're looking to get into sim racing for the very first time or looking to upgrade existing gear, by the end of today's video you should have a much better picture of whether this new gear from Logitech might be the right choice for you. So let's dive in. Okay guys, so we've got a lot of stuff to get through today, but firstly, as always, a couple of quick housekeeping things so you have the full context of exactly what we're doing today. So firstly, a big thank you to Logitech for sending across this gear for us to check out. Now, as you guys know, we love to do comparisons here at Boosted Media, so we will be cross-comparing all of this gear against all the other competitive products that we've had our hands on over the years here. So it's important that you guys are aware that all of those products have been provided to us under the exact same conditions. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video, or any other sim racing gear for that matter, do yourself a favor and head over to boostedmedia.net. There you'll find a bunch of really detailed buyer's guides, comparison charts, and a bunch of handy discount codes as well, which are an awesome way of helping support the channel without it costing you an extra cent, and hopefully saving yourselves a little bit of money in the process as well. So we really appreciate your support by not only watching these videos, but supporting us in that way. It's what keeps us running here at Boosted Media. So thank you very much for that. But yeah, as is always the case here, no third party has any sort of input whatsoever into anything that we'll be discussing today. Everything I'll be sharing is just my own opinions and my own experience, having used these products for, well, in some cases a number of years now, but these particular products for a couple of weeks. So without further ado, let's dive in and take a look at this new range from Logitech. So what exactly are these new products and where do they fit into the market? So as you guys would be aware, Logitech historically have had their entry-level gear, their driving force gear, so the Logitech G920, G923 a little bit more recently, and so forth. They then, 3 years ago, almost to the day in fact, released their G Pro series. And that was a huge jump up, not only in build quality, but also the overall driving experience. Now, it did come with a pretty hefty price tag to go along with that jump in quality. And I think it kind of took a lot of people by surprise because they were expecting something that was going to be more similar to, say, something like the G923, for example, and they were wondering why Logitech made such a big jump into sort of the more high-end side of the market. And look, in my honest opinion, I'll just straight up say it to you guys, what we're looking at today's video is what they should have released 3 years ago, in my opinion. And the reasons for that will come very clear as we get on through today's video. So this is the racing series. It consists of the RS50 wheelbase. Don't really know why they named it RS50 because it's an 8 Newton meter wheelbase here. New racing series pedals with a load cell brake as standard. And they also announced a brand new collaboration with McLaren F1, including some pretty funky A50X headphones, which we might take a more detailed look at in another video, as well as a Formula style wheel rim, which is going to be compatible with the RS wheel hub that we've looked at in a previous video. And we don't unfortunately have one of those new McLaren wheels in the studio just yet, but we'll share a picture on the screen for you guys now, and we will give you a hands-on experience as soon as we're able to do so. But yeah, as I said, we have covered a lot of the other wheels and the expansion of the G Pro ecosystem in previous videos. So I'll link those down below for you guys. Important that you're aware that all of this new gear is cross-compatible with the G Pro series. And we'll unpack some of the nuances when it comes to cross-compatibility as we get on through today's video, because there are a couple of important caveats that you do need to be aware of. So in a nutshell, brand new 8 Newton meter direct drive wheelbase, finally in a form factor that people might actually want to have on their sim rig. Brand new pedals as well. And these are going to sit in the market between the G923 belt driven and the driving force pedals and accessories. And of course the G Pro lineup that we've looked at previously. Okay, so before we dig deeper into the hardware, let's take a look at pricing information. Now, first of all, I want to let you guys know we do have a 5% discount code available for Logitech on their web store. So you just put in the code BOOSTED and that will give you a 5% discount on any Logitech G gear. So that includes all this gear, the G Pro gear, even things like keyboards, mice, and accessories are discounted as well. So definitely check that out if you are looking at buying one of these. But I will also just note for you guys, don't assume that that is going to be the best pricing for you. They are intending on selling this new gear in traditional bricks and mortar retail. I believe it is going to be a staged rollout, so it won't necessarily be available everywhere in the world all at once, but do your own research there. Just make sure you're getting the best price possible, factoring in things like shipping costs, import duties, and so forth, because all that is quite complicated with the world the way it is at the moment. But just to give you a ballpark here, you're looking at a similar similar kind of price range to what a lot of competitor products are coming in at, including a lot of the Ready to Race bundles from Fanatec. And we will do some side-by-side comparisons with the hardware here on the table for you in just a minute so you can see exactly where the differences are. And it's also important to understand here that Xbox compatibility comes from a security chip inside the wheel, whereas PlayStation compatibility comes from a security chip inside the wheelbase. So if you buy the PlayStation compatible version of the wheelbase and you then pair it with an Xbox compatible wheel, you do have compatibility across both Xbox, PlayStation, as well as, of course, PC. Whereas if you buy the Xbox and PC only version of the wheelbase, doesn't have that PlayStation security chip in it, so you will be limited to only ever using it with PC or Xbox, regardless of what wheel you want to combine it with. So if you do want to have compatibility across all three platforms, much better to go for the PlayStation version of the base and then an Xbox wheel, and that will give you compatibility across all three platforms. So for the Xbox and PC version of the RS50 base, and they are going to be selling the base on its own, I'm happy to let you know, you're looking at $349.99 in the US. Euro, you're looking at $299.99. Australian dollars, you're looking at $599.95. Now for the PlayStation and PC compatible version of the same wheelbase, you do have to pay that PlayStation tax, unfortunately. So you're looking at $449.99 in the US, $399.99 Euro, or $699.95 here in Australia. Now they will be offering this in a couple of different bundles as well. So you can buy the base on its own, as we just discussed, or you can buy the base combined with an RS hub and RS wheel, like what you see in front of me here. Those are separable, as you'll see later on. And that will also be available in both Xbox and PC and PlayStation and PC combinations. So again, just understand that if you buy the Xbox combination, you'll never be able to use any of the gear with a PlayStation, whereas if you buy the PlayStation version and then you buy an Xbox compatible wheel down the line, you will have the trifecta once again. So the pricing here for the bundles is the same regardless of whether you go for the PlayStation or the Xbox compatible version. And that is simply because you're paying the PlayStation tax on the wheelbase side, whereas you're paying the Xbox tax on the wheel side. So just keep in mind what we were discussing before about if you want to have cross-platform compatibility, you are better to go for the PlayStation option and then buy an Xbox compatible wheel down the line. So bundle pricing here, you're looking at $699.99 in the US, $649.99 Euro, or $1,199.95 here in Australia. Now, you're probably wondering, what about the pedals on the right-hand side of your screen? Those are not included in this bundle package. So although that pricing might sound very similar to what you'd see for a lot of the Fanatec Ready to Race bundles, remember they do come with their entry-level CSL pedals included in those bundles, whereas you are going to be paying a little bit extra for the pedals that you see here. And unfortunately, these pedals aren't going to be available immediately at release, unlike the base and the wheel options. So that might leave a few people high and dry. Of course, you can use any pedals that you want if you're playing on PC, but if you are running on a console and wanting to use this wheelbase and associated wheels, you will be stuck either using G Pro pedals or using the adapter that I'll show you in just a moment, and your old pedals from your Logitech G920 or G923 if you have one of those. So hopefully they're able to release these a little bit quicker than they told us it might happen, but they have told me that they're expecting to see this available by the end of the year. So fingers crossed that actually happens. But the RS pedals, again, are going to be available in a couple of different combinations. It will be available as a 2-pedal set, which includes a Hall effect sensor throttle and a 75 kilogram load cell brake pedal, which of course we'll be looking at in detail in just a moment. So the 2-pedal set, you're looking at $159.99 in the US, $149.99 Euro, or $259.95 in Australia. So pretty aggressively priced. We'll talk about the quality and the driving experience, of course, later on. And then you also have the option of adding the RS clutch module as well. And that pedal works exactly the same way with the Hall effect sensor to what we have in the throttle pedal. And for that add-on, you're looking at $44.99 in the US, $39.99 Euro, or $69.95 in Australia. So that is a quick rundown on the pricing. Again, head over to boostedmedia.net or follow the link down in the description or in the pinned comment below for a more detailed pricing comparison. But speaking of comparisons, let's get into the hardware now and talk more about what exactly you're getting for that money and how it compares to some other options available in the market today. So I think the best place to start on the hardware is unpacking the ecosystem in a little bit more detail. I mentioned before that this is cross-compatible one way or another with the older driving force gear, so your Logitech G920, G923, and of course the G Pro gear. So how exactly does that work? Now I have done a more detailed compatibility video in the past, which again I'll link down below for you guys if you are wanting more than what we're going to be giving in today's video. But just to give you a quick rundown here, you do have the option of directly plugging in Logitech's handbrake / sequential shifter module that we've reviewed previously. That will just plug in via the USB port directly into the back of the wheelbase or directly into your PC if you're on PC, and that will be good to go. So that is nice and plain and simple. You do also have the option of this adapter hub, which will allow you to connect your old driving force gear to the wheelbase directly again. So this is actually quite a nifty little device. You can connect the USB connection into the back of the base, and that gives you two RS232 style ports on the front here, one male, one female, and that will allow you to connect G923 or G920 pedals and the old driving force H pattern shifter to this hub, and that will give you compatibility with this wheelbase. You can also run this thing backwards as well. So if you would decide, for example, that you want to upgrade your pedals, but still stick with your older G923 wheelbase, you can also plug this into your G923 wheelbase, plug your pedals into the USB port on the back of it there, and that will also work. And that same goes for the G Pro pedals as well. So if you want to upgrade and go baller pedals, but still keep your G923 wheelbase, you can do that as well. So quite a handy little device there. The elephant in the room here is absolutely the fact that they still, 3 years after they launched the G Pro wheelbase, don't have a G Pro or any sort of high or even mid-level H pattern shifter, which I think is still quite a big deterrent. I was really surprised that they didn't at least announce that they were working on something. I did ask the question, of course, but Logitech being Logitech, they don't talk about anything that they haven't formally announced or at least press released. So yeah, I have no idea whether they have one in the works or what the heck is going on there, but I do sincerely hope that they announce something soon. Now, of course, if you are playing on PC, this doesn't really matter because you can just plug in whatever shifter you want, and there's some really awesome ones available out there depending on your budget, of course. But if you are gaming on a console, whether it be Xbox or PlayStation, because you can only connect one external peripheral to the device, you are going to be limited to either the sequential / handbrake or the driving force H pattern shifter, unless you jump through all sorts of hoops with emulators and things that are beyond the scope of today's video. So that is one thing that you guys do need to consider very carefully, regardless of how good the driving experience is with this. Other ecosystems like Fanatec, for example, do have not only a wider selection of wheels, but also other peripherals like shifters, handbrakes, and so forth that give you a lot more versatility. Now, I'm sure that Logitech will get there over time, but look, in the 3 years since they launched the G Pro, they haven't expanded their ecosystem as much as I hoped that they would. But there are a couple of important things to be aware of on the wheel side. So I mentioned earlier the RS hub and the rim that the bundle deal comes with. So this is a closer look now at the Xbox compatible version of that hub. Now, this is quite a nice little unit, and again, we have reviewed this previously, but one thing to be aware of here is that it does have raised areas for the 4-way switch as well as your shoulder buttons. So that is going to limit the rims that this is going to be compatible with. So for example, if we take a look at one of Logitech's Momo rims, you can see this actually does have cutouts here for those areas. And you can imagine straight away, even though it has a pretty standard bolt pattern on the front here, you're not going to be able to mount any wheel that doesn't have these cutouts in it. Now, there are a few aftermarket options available these days. Max Pappas Industries, or MPI, for example, have a pretty cool option here, which, we might check out in a little bit more detail in another video, a little bit beyond the scope of today's video. But it is good to see there is an expanding range of not only first party, but third party rims available. There is also a 320mm round rim available too, and you'll see some driving footage with that guy throughout today's video as well. The other important thing to be aware of is their RSQR adapter. Now again, we have looked at this in detail previously, so I'm only going to skim over this in today's video, but essentially you've got your wheel side quick release, so this would mount on the front of your wheelbase like so, and then you've got a standard 70mm and 50mm bolt pattern on the front of this that allows you to connect any third-party wheel that you want. Now, there is unfortunately no standard protocol USB pass-through on this base. There are USB ports on the back that we'll take a look at in just a moment. And you can see there are pins that interface with Logitech's first-party wheels, There is also a little pin header inside there as well, but unfortunately that doesn't provide standard USB pass-through. Now, of course, this is kind of out of the question for console users anyway, but if you are on PC, it is important that you know, even though there are USB ports on the back that we'll take a look at a little bit later, and a pin header inside this, they don't provide any sort of interface cable or anything like that. So if you are wanting to run a third-party wheel that requires power and data, you will have to either plug it into your USB hub or run it back to your PC to get that working. We did test it out with GSI's Formula Pro Elite V2 just to make sure we didn't have any issues with excessive play or things rattling loose or anything like that, and it was absolutely fine, but of course we did have to plug the wheel directly into our PC. Now, if you're cross-comparing against other PC-compatible platforms, SimMagic, for example, as well as Acertech with their new Initium and, of course, their more high-end bases, do all have generic USB pass-through. So that means you can plug a third-party wheel directly into the quick release and it will power up, in most cases at least, anyway. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you are on PC, but on PlayStation, that's not really going to be a factor anyway. So that's everything you need to know in terms of the wider ecosystem for the context of today's video, at least. Again, if you do want any more information on any of the products that you've just seen, check out our other videos linked down in the description box, which go into them in more detail. But now that you understand the basics of the ecosystem, let's talk about what we're actually getting for the money here in terms of the physical hardware. So let's start off here with the RS50 wheelbase. And as you can see straight away, it is quite similar in physical design to the familiar GT DD Pro from Fanatec. CSL-DD, of course, being quite similar to this in design. This is just the PlayStation compatible version of the same product. Now, unlike with the CSL-DD/GT DD Pro, which was 5 Newton meters by default and upgradable to 8 Newton meters with the boost kit, or if you buy one of their ready to race bundles that comes with the boost kit, this guy does give you 8 Newton meters of peak strength right out of the box. Now, I did ask them specifically whether it was 8 Newton meters of continuous or peak strength. They told me that it is peak strength, but it is able to hold that peak strength for quite a length of time. I didn't do any sort of scientific testing on that. There are other people out there in the review space these days that are able to do a much better job of that kind of thing than I can, but I can tell you that I didn't come across any scenario where I felt any kind of drop off in performance with this thing. It never felt overly warm to the touch or anything like that during any of my driving, maxed out at 8 Newton meters, of course. And if anything, honestly, I actually felt that this felt a little bit more strong than some other products that are marketed at around this kind of strength level. Now, of course, it will depend on the diameter of the wheel that you're driving. We'll talk about that in more detail when we get into the wheel in just a second. But yeah, look, I generally describe the sweet spot as being somewhere between about the 10 and 14 Newton meter mark for most people. To put it in perspective here, most street cars, you're looking at sort of, 3 to 5 Newton meters of strength through the wheel, through power steering, just general driving. Race cars, you can get anywhere up to even say 25 Newton meters if you're looking at something like an Indy car that doesn't have assisted steering or any sort of power steering. So look, it is going to depend ultimately on what you're driving. Essentially what this comes down to is the dynamic range available. So the more Newton meters that you have available to you, the more dynamic range you have, and that increases the ability of the wheelbase to produce different kinds of effects throughout that range without having to compress the signal down into a small range. So if you're comparing the driving experience with something that has around the 8 Newton meter mark of strength compared to something like a G923 at around sort of 2.5, 3 Newton meters of strength, you're going to notice that the stronger forces like cornering forces, bumping into other cars, are able to feel nice and clearly defined at high strength levels. But unlike on those weaker bases, that doesn't come at the cost of loss of fidelity in those weaker things like road textures, ripple strips, and so forth. On those weaker bases, you're having to compress all of that information into a very small dynamic range. The more Newton meters of strength you have, the more dynamic range you have to play with overall. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, we have gone into more detail on that in previous videos as well if you are wanting to understand, or just let me know in the comments down below and we might do an updated video going into more detail on that. But look, the bottom line is, in my opinion at least, I think that 8 Newton meters of strength that we have here is going to be enough to please the majority of people that are looking at this kind of class of product. It certainly doesn't feel as strong as the G Pro, but honestly, in my opinion, I would actually rather go for this product than the G Pro simply because of the form factor here. I found the G Pro was just far too limiting in its mounting options and so forth, whereas, I'm happy to take the hit in overall fidelity and strength here, as small as that hit is, just to have more versatility in terms of mounting options and how it looks on the rig as well. So yeah, I think 8 Newton meters is about right for this product. So one of the questions that I did ask specifically was regarding the slew rate, which of course is how responsive overall the wheelbase feels, or how quickly it can change direction in simple terms. The answer that I got back from the product manager was So the slew rate we're not talking about with this one. So read into that what you guys want. What I can tell you though is that it did feel every bit as responsive as I would expect a product in this class to feel, if not maybe a little bit more than some of the competitor products that sit around this kind of range. So even though they didn't want to tell me what the actual slew rate was, it certainly didn't seem to be lacking in that department. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised by that answer. I did specifically ask about the whole peak versus continuous torque thing as well. The answer I got there was it is 8 Newton meter peak as far as the engineers are concerned. But the reality, as I said before, is that you can drive that continuously for a long time, especially if it's bolted to a rig where the metal helps with heat dissipation. Now, throughout all of my testing, regardless of whether I had this mounted to a table clamp or to my solid rig, I didn't have any issues with heat or overheating, as I was mentioning before anyway. So that all seemed to be fine. So I did ask them some specifics about the exact motor that they're using in here as well. They told me it is a custom servo with 14 poles and a 12 slot design, if that is something that is important to you. And they also told me that it's a 16-bit encoder that they're using in the base as well. So that means 65,536 steps of resolution throughout a 360-degree rotation of the wheel. So we do see some other competitor products that have a higher resolution than this, some others that have a lower resolution as well. And again, check our specific reviews of other competitor products for more details on those comparisons. But what I can tell you once again is that this was an extremely smooth driving experience, and I didn't feel even the slightest hint of anything like cogging or torque ripple, which is often caused by motors that have large steps between the magnets. So you can imagine that kind of wants to jump to the next position. Nothing like that, perfectly smooth, and no sort of hint of lack of resolution here either. It wasn't sort of wanting to jump into a different spot or feeling robotic or anything like that. Very, very, very smooth overall driving experiences. We'll unpack in more detail later on. So that is some specifics around the motor itself. In terms of the physical design here, it is a cast aluminium housing. You can see the ridges on here for additional heat dissipation. One thing I did notice is that despite the little cooling vents that we see on the front here, there doesn't appear to be any active cooling inside the base itself. So it does appear to be completely passively cooled. As I've mentioned multiple times now, no thermal issues at all that we ran into, but I am a fan of passive cooling rather than active cooling, simply because active cooling does create an opportunity for dirt and debris to accumulate, moving parts to break and wear out over time, and so forth. So happy to see that design choice. We do have a plastic front and rear housing, so very similar overall in presentation to what we get with the CSL DD or GT DD Pro. I would say the plastic does feel a little bit higher quality here, not massively so, but it does just have a slightly more classy and more high-end feel to it. I would say overall, the build quality here across this range, including the wheels that we'll look at in just a moment, is pretty much identical to what you get with the G Pro rather than what you get with the G923, for example. So definitely comes with premium build quality. We also have a little OLED display on the front here. Now we'll go into more detail on exactly what that does when we get into the software section of the video a little later on, but it gives you pretty much the same functionality as you get within the Fanatec ecosystem, although their screens are typically on the wheel rather than the wheelbase, which I do prefer. But just to give you a quick rundown, it allows you to switch between profiles and make adjustments to force feedback settings and pedal settings to some extent at least right here from the wheelbase and wheel, rather than having to go in through menus on your PC to make those adjustments. And that can be particularly important when you're gaming on a console. This is kind of the only way that you have the ability to make those adjustments. Some other ecosystems these days, we see mobile apps that allow you to connect in and make adjustments to settings on your phone. That's not something that is offered with Logitech just yet, so that's one thing to be aware of there. But yeah, we already talked briefly about the quick release. It is exactly the same quick release as we see on the G Pro. So just to grab the QR adapter again, you can see we've got a ring here, very similar in looks to the Fanatec QR1, which you guys know now has been superseded by the QR2 that we see here. Unlike with the QR1 from Fanatec though, this doesn't have any sort of play or movement or slop in it at all. Once you have this mated up, it is a nice solid connection. You can see here, when you put it onto the wheelbase, it does just sort of snap into position like so, and then you pull on the collar and it just slides off again very simply. Now, one thing I did notice is there is a little bit of scoring already starting to show up on the motor shaft. It does appear to be some sort of a coating that they put on the shaft rather than it actually sort of etching into the metal itself. But over time, it is of course a possibility that wear and tear may cause you to start to get a little bit of movement in the quick release. So at this point, I've probably got 40 or 50 hours of use on my G Pro wheelbase, which again has the exact same quick release. And we haven't noticed any issues with movement or slop or play developing. But if you do own a G Pro wheelbase, let us know in the comments down below the video whether or not that is something that you've noticed developing over time. That's going to be far more valuable to the audience than me giving an evaluation based off a couple of weeks of use on this new product. So yeah, let us know in the comments down below. But yeah, a nice solid design here. And yeah, I do just want to reiterate here that even though it does look very similar to the Fanatec QR1, definitely a tighter tolerance, higher quality quick release than what we had with the older Fanatec QR1. So no issues there that I'm aware of, but again, let us know in the comments down below if you have had any problems. Flipping the wheelbase around here, you can see the inputs and outputs. We've got a little start stop button here as well. So that is just a momentary switch to switch on and off the wheelbase. Down the bottom here, we've got our power connector. That does actually clip into place, which I'm in kind of two minds about. On the one hand, it means it's not going to work its way loose and fall out over time. On the other hand, it means if you do step on the cable, it's going to break the connector rather than just pulling out. So let us know in the comments what you think about that. Next to that, you've got 3 USB-A ports. As I was mentioning before, they don't offer generic USB pass-through, so it is only compatible with Logitech's own peripherals there. And then next to that, you've got your USB-C port for connecting to your console or through to your PC. Simple as that on the back of the unit. On the base of the unit, let's talk about mounting now. So we don't have any option for front mounting here, but you do have 2 slots on the bottom here, very similar to what you have in the Fanatec ecosystem. I'll put the measurements up on the screen for you now, but it is using the standard hole pattern that you'll find on other Logitech products. And pretty much every single cockpit that's available on the market these days is compatible with this hole pattern. So you're not likely to have any issues there, but of course, just check. Most cockpit manufacturers do list their compatible products. So if it says it's compatible with Logitech, chances are it's also going to be compatible with this. So they include inside the package a set of 4 of these little T-nuts. And what you do is you slide these into the rails here, just like what you have on the GT DD Pro or CSL-DD or the CSDD and DD Plus for that matter. So they slide in and then you screw through your rig and mount in. Now, one thing that you might have noticed in the past with the Fanatec gear is that it can be very difficult to get the T-nuts in the exact right spot. They want to slide around, and it can be quite difficult even to just sort of slide onto your rig once you've got everything in place. What Logitech have done here is actually quite smart. So they're giving you this little plastic adapter, and what you can do is slide that in like so, and that is going to keep those T-nuts located in the correct position to make it a whole lot easier to mount on your rig. So little touches like that, I think, are a nice touch from Logitech. Just shows, you know, a bit of a higher level of attention to detail, and that somebody along the line of developing this product has had a frustration with that and decided to come up with a solution. So I did appreciate that. So it is only bottom mount compatible, but you might have heard me mention just before the table clamp. So let me grab that quickly for you now. This is a table clamp, works pretty much exactly the same way as it does on the G Pro. So clamps onto the table, screws into the bottom of the base down here. And look, it does have a little bit of flex in it, but it's not going to be the flexiest thing on your setup. Your table is likely going to move a lot more than this does, but you've got a nice thick area here to mount in. I'll give you the measurements of this on the screen as well, so you can see exactly what you can and can't mount it on. That does come included if you buy the bundle with the base and the RS wheel and hub, but it doesn't come as standard if you're buying the base on its own. So just be aware of that. I don't actually have individual pricing of the table clamp on me just now. So that's a quick breakdown on the things I think you need to know about the physical hardware itself on the outside. Let's take a quick look on the inside, see if there's any interesting stuff to be seen there, and then we'll move on to the wheel and the pedals. So just a super quick look at the internals for those who are interested. You can see a very flimsy little ribbon cable there connected through to our tuning menu screen on the front, but you can see the quick release there, and it is just a pinch style connection, very similar to what we see on the GT DD Pro and CSL-DD from Fanatec. So that just bolts directly onto the motor shaft in there. You can see the motor housing here, which interestingly is plastic. One thing I do think is worth mentioning here is you can see how the quick release actually bolts or clamps down on the motor shaft here. Now, if you go back and have a look at our review of the CSL-DD/GT DD Pro, you'll remember it actually has a carbon infused plastic shaft. Now, the reason for that was to reduce the rotating mass to make the motor more responsive and sharper feeling. But we did see the odd occasion where people were clamping down too hard, particularly when they were upgrading from QR1 to QR2 and actually cracking that shaft, and then that ultimately needs a replacement motor. So it did come with that potential weakness, although admittedly we didn't at least see a whole lot of cases that are happening, so don't see that being a major detractor. But what we do notice here is there is actually a steel or aluminium shaft coming out of the motor housing and actually clamping down on this. So this is fundamentally a stronger design, I would say, than what we see in the CSL-DD and GT DD Pro. Although in practice, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. One thing we did notice in the driving experience, and I'm not going to be able to make it do it now, but if we do pull on the wheel, we can actually get a little bit of play in the shaft just front to back, Wasn't anything that I noticed when I was driving, but if I intentionally did it, there was a little bit of movement there. It wasn't the quick release, it was actually the shaft itself moving back and forth within the motor housing. So it'll be interesting to see whether anybody else notices that or has that experience. I wouldn't recommend you go and intentionally try to pull on your wheel. But yeah, just something that I did notice. Let's flip around now and take a look at the backside. You can see the ribbon cable passing through to the motherboard on the back here. This is what's responsible for all of our power delivery as well as all of our signal processing. So we can see our ground here going to the motor housing, our 3 phases here for motor control, a couple of capacitors here. We've got our STM32 processor sitting just here, and you can see obviously USB ports down the bottom here as well. And yeah, nothing really strikes me as particularly peculiar or interesting here. Pretty standard, no issues with build quality, not that I would expect to see any. Was interested to see the extent of the use of plastic throughout here. A lot of other competitor products, we do see metal housing, but I mean, of course, the outer shell here, the outer casing and the heat sink assembly is all cast aluminium, so no issues, as I said before, with heat dissipation. Down here is our little colored cable, which passes through to the front of the motor. Not sure if they're using some sort of an optical transceiver or a slip ring design. I'm guessing it's probably slip ring, but I don't want to pull this apart any further than this right now, simply because I don't want to cause any alignment issues with the encoder and mess up the driving experience in any way. So if you do have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them in the comments to the best of my ability. Or if you do want to see a more complete teardown than what we're doing in today's video, let us know in the comments and we'll do our best to make that happen. So yeah, not really anything more to discuss here for the context of today's video. What I want to do now is spend a little bit more time talking about Trueforce and exactly what it is, and then we'll move on and take a look at the wheel. So before we move on, I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about exactly what Trueforce does and doesn't do, because I do still see quite a bit of confusion out there in the sim racing sphere, and I want to make sure that everybody that's looking at buying one of these understands exactly what they're getting themselves into with Trueforce. So essentially, Trueforce is like a second layer of force feedback effects that sits on top of the standard force feedback effects that you'd get on any direct drive or any wheelbase for that matter. So on PC at least, you've got a interface called direct input. So direct input interfaces with the game's physics and gives you things like suspension movement, tire interface, the sensation of going up on ripple strips, surface texture of the road to some extent at least, and so forth. So Trueforce goes one step further than this. And you can kind of think of it like a haptic feedback system, similar to a butt kicker if you've ever used one of those. So what it's essentially doing is it's taking additional telemetry out of the game and producing additional effects based on that. Now, it is integration dependent. It is a API or application programming interface, meaning that the game developers themselves do actually have to integrate Trueforce into their games in order for it to work. So that integration can vary in its complexity and how good it feels to the end user. So in some cases, it is literally just taking the audio output signal of the game and then using it to generate audio-based effects, so things like engine vibration through the wheelbase. Whereas some games like iRacing, for example, give you a little bit more granular control, although still not through the UI, unfortunately. But if you go into the INI files, you can actually fine-tune and tweak outputs like tire slip, for example. You get a little bit more sensation in some of those more granular details than what you do through the standard direct input interface. And on console, it's very similar as well. So the advantage here with Trueforce, at least in my experience, is that it's got very minimal latency. They're actually claiming 1 millisecond of latency, which is pretty remarkable. There are a few other force feedback systems that are similar to this that we've seen over the years, like IRFFB, for example. And some of those use game telemetry pulled via UDP protocol and then use it to process additional effects. But those tend to add a lot more latency than what something like this does. But it does all come down to that game integration. Now, Fanatec have a similar thing in their Full Force, which is available on their Club Sport DD and Club Sport DD Plus, but not on their CSL DD and GT DD Pro. So nobody else at this point in time, at least, has anything in this kind of price bracket that is able to produce those same granular effects than what we get out of the Logitech system. Now, it's definitely a less is more type thing. So we'll unpack that side of things more when we get into the driving experience in just a moment. But I wanted you to understand what exactly Trueforce is here. It's an API that is integrated at a game level that allows the wheelbase to generate additional effects on top of the standard force feedback effects that you would feel on any wheelbase. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, let us know in the comments down below. But we'll get into what that actually means for the driving experience in just a little bit. Let's now move on to the hardware hardware side of the wheels, the pedals, and then the software. So super quick overview of the wheel ecosystem now, simply because we have covered these wheels before. And again, I'll link the video where we went into more detail down in the description below for you if you want to check it out. But look, the things you need to know for the context of this video: same quality, exactly the same wheels, in fact, that are compatible with the G Pro, which is obviously a lot more expensive a wheelbase. So you are getting a higher level of build quality here than what you're getting in relatively comparatively priced products from alternative manufacturers. So just to give you a couple of points of comparison here, that is obviously your Logitech wheel. If we grab the Fanatec GT DD Pro wheel, you can see this looks a lot more plasticky. It is a lot more plasticky. You've got a rubber rim here, plastic down the bottom, all plastic touch points here. You've got a brushed aluminium by contrast here. More snappy buttons here on the Logitech wheel. They do feel a little bit nicer to me, but not by a huge margin. The ones on the Fanatec wheel are a little bit more squishy and a little bit less defined in their press. You do have the advantage, I would say, of having the tuning menu screen and telemetry displayed on the wheel itself with the Fanatec ecosystem, as opposed to on the wheel base on Logitech, which does mean it's awkward to see on some wheels, but it's not generally used for viewing live telemetry data like it is within the Fanatec ecosystem, more just used for making tuning adjustments like we talked about just before, and we'll look at in the software section in just a moment. But definitely a much, much, much higher quality, more premium feeling. I mean, you guys can see it for yourselves here just looking at it. One thing I would mention is if you are a Gran Turismo 5 player, the interface here with the assigned buttons on the Polyphony designed wheel from Fanatec are a little bit more easy to use and easy to navigate than they are on the Logitech wheel. So that may be one thing that might sway you the other way. But beyond that, definitely a much higher quality wheel over here than what we get from the relatively equivalent Fanatec bundle. Same goes for when we flip the wheel around as well. Really nice, solid metal shifters, magnetic shifters at that, within the Logitech ecosystem. Whereas if we flip around and take a look, plastic, spring-loaded contact switch style shifters that just don't have anywhere near the same kind of quality feel on the GT DD Pro wheel. Now, just to give you another quick point of comparison here as well, this is the P1 wheel from Fanatec, and again, you can see nowhere near the same kind of build quality as you get with the Logitech. But look, essentially, and again, I would recommend go and have a look at our pricing chart on the written review for a more clear breakdown on this. But essentially what you're losing in terms of quality on the wheel, you're gaining in the fact that you get a set of entry-level pedals, the CSL pedals included with the Fanatec bundles, whereas you don't with the Logitech ones. So look, I mean, it's going to come down to where you place value. I will say that most people would likely want to upgrade those CSL pedals with the load cell, which is an additional cost, whereas the Logitech pedals, if you opt for those, do come with the load cells. So factor that in as well. The other thing to mention here, of course, as well, is that Fanatec do have a much wider ecosystem of different styles of wheels than Logitech do at this point. They do have a couple of different wheel rims, as we discussed before. They do have that new McLaren one, which again, I'll flash an image up on the screen for you now because we don't have it here just yet. They've got a more Formula Open style wheel like this guy, but again, not a massive amount of versatility because of the design of the button plate itself, with the need for cutouts where the buttons poke through. So look, if you're after ultimate versatility here in terms of a native ecosystem of wheels, then Fanatec definitely have a stronger offering across a wider variety of different price points, from entry-level wheels like what we just took a look at to their much more high-end wheels. In fact, you know, real-life race car wheels like what we see with the Bentley wheel and the BMW wheel that we've reviewed in the past as well. So definitely a way to go there in terms of the Logitech ecosystem. But you know, with things like the universal QR adapter like we looked at before, at least you do have the option of connecting any wheel you want, at least if you're on PC. So I think that's everything you need to know in the context of today's video, at least with regards to the wheels. Again, if you are wanting more information on those specifically, check out our additional review video linked down in the description below, where you will find all that detail. Let's move on now and take a look at the RS pedals. So quick hardware overview now of the RS pedals. Do come as default, as I mentioned before in the pricing section, as a 2-pedal set. The optional accessory of a clutch can be added on if you wish to do so. The default brake pedal does include a 75 kilogram rated load cell though. So unlike Fanatec or Moser's entry-level pedals that all come with just Hall effect brake pedals, this is a much higher end brake pedal right out of the gate than what you're getting with those more entry-level pedals. So important to note that right out of the box. Now, interestingly, these are comparatively priced to the Asetek Ignition pedals that we reviewed just a couple of weeks ago, which I was very, very, very high in praise for. Those are still a position-based brake pedal, unlike the load cell that we have here, but the implementation there was really good. I would definitely recommend check out that review if you haven't seen it already, so you get the full understanding of exactly what I'm talking about here. But back to these pedals now. Hall effect sensors for the throttle and the clutch pedal. That means no moving parts or potentiometers like what we had in the old G920 and G923 pedals that can take on dirt and debris over time and lose their sensitivity or start to give weird readings. But look, there isn't a whole lot of definition in either the throttle or the clutch pedal. They are set at a fixed angle, so it is intended to be driven flat on the ground. So if you have a sim rig that you're going to be mounting these to a cockpit, you are going to want to tilt them up like so to get them at a 90-degree angle or thereabouts relative to the floor. So not quite the same level of adjustment that you see in some other pedals like those Asetek Initium pedals, for example. But you do have plenty of other adjustability here. So you can move the pedals from side to side throughout this array of mounting holes on the front here. So when I had this configured as a 2-pedal set, as you can see in this quick snippet of driving footage here, I had the throttle sort of in the middle here, and then the brake over on this side. When I added the clutch, I then spaced them out even further, but you can set this up however you want. It does have a pretty standard mounting system here. Again, very similar to the design overall that we see with the Fanatec CSL pedals or Moses entry-level pedals as well. So you've got 2 bolts that go through the front here. You've then also got mounting holes on the back of the pedals that you can use to mount through to your rig or bolt down to a plank of wood or something like that on the floor should you wish to do so. Now, speaking of floor use, one other important thing to point out here before we get into more specifics on the brake pedal, you do also have the option of some little carpet spikes which do come included in the box. So if you are driving on carpet, those do a really good job of keeping the pedals in place. You also have these really nifty little extension arms here, and you can bolt them onto the back of the pedals like so. In a flat position, that gives you a little bit of extra stability on carpet. Or if you're up against a wall, what you can do, and this is really clever, you can actually mount them like this and then push the pedals right up against the wall. And that's going to mean when you push the brake pedal down, the pedals don't want to tip up like so, because they're actually braced up against the wall in this position here. So a really clever little addition there. And we did find that the chair tended to want to move before the pedals did up against the wall when we used that. So yeah, they've done a good job there. One thing Tom and I did both notice is that the hard bump stops on the throttle and clutch pedals are quite loud. I'll spin it around so you can see a little bit better. And yeah, you can see on the back here, on a lot of higher end pedals, you see the use of urethane or rubber hosing to dampen when you hit the bump stop. On this, it is just metal to metal contact, so you do get that clunk when you hit the end of the travel. Look, I mean, it didn't bother me when I was driving, but you know, if you are racing in an environment where you've got somebody trying to sleep or study or work right next door to you, or you live in an apartment block with somebody right below you, that may be a deal breaker for you. You could always just wrap it in a little bit of tape or something like that to soften it down. You know, it's not a difficult thing to fix yourself. And you know, anything you do to dampen it will, of course, mean a more cushioned bump stop at the end of the travel. But yeah, just one little thing that we did notice, so definitely thought it was worth just pointing out. But look, ultimately it does end up coming down to the feel of the brake pedal. That is where you need the most precision out of anything on your sim rig if you want to drive quickly and consistently, as you guys have heard me say in multiple pedal reviews over the years. So as I mentioned before, you do have a 75 kilogram load rating here at the pedal face, I believe. I'm not sure exactly what the rating is of the load cell itself. Now, interestingly, when we crank the sensitivity up, as you'll see in the software section later on, I was able to push a lot harder than 70 kilograms to get to that 100% full scale deflection. So it seems that you're not going to oversaturate the load cell here, even if you're the heaviest of heavy-footed breakers. But the configuration here is quite interesting. You've got 3 little polyurethane inserts here, and as you push down, you can see those compress, and that's what gives you the sensation of compression in the brake pedal. Now, as you push the pedal down, you guys have heard me say this a million times before, it's really important fundamentally for a brake pedal to have some sort of a threshold point that's clearly defined so that you can always brake to that same point consistently and then modulate around. And what a load cell or a well-designed position-based brake pedal like the Asetek Initium pedal that we looked at just a couple of weeks ago will do is allow you to consistently hit that threshold and then modulate your input around that, so you can increase your brake pressure slightly if you need to, and then trail brake off with precision as well. So you can proportionally reduce what you're asking of the tire longitudinally via the brakes as you start to ask more of it laterally as you're turning into the corner, if that makes sense. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about there, look up traction circle. It's a really great way of getting fundamentally faster, both on real life racetracks and in sim racing. So definitely worth checking out. But yeah, look, this brake pedal does a good job, I would say, of providing a balance between something that you can drive on carpet and something that you can mount on a sim rig and still have plenty of precision there. I wouldn't say it does as good a job as those Acertec Ignition pedals. I do think that those nail the fundamentals a little bit better, but you do have a little bit more versatility here in what you can dial in terms of feel. So if I quickly pop out the load cell, which is as simple to do as just literally pulling up on it, you can see it pops out of the back like so. It'll just come out. And then what you can actually do is included inside the package, you've got a couple of little spacers that look exactly like the little polyurethane inserts, but these are rock solid. So what that means is that you can put your little spacer in like so, go with one, go with two, and then when you reassemble it, now instead of having 3 individual polyurethane inserts, you've only got one there, and then you're pushing up against a brick wall essentially. Now, because it is connected to a load cell, you can still push beyond that and get a measurement. So that is an important difference there. But you can see now you have a much, much, much stiffer pedal, and you can go with 2 if you wanted to as well, or just the 3 like we saw in the default settings. So plenty of versatility there. And look, I was able to adapt to this and come pretty close to matching my lap times that I do with my $10,000 Simucube Actin pedals that I have on my daily driver rig. So at an absolute fraction of the price there, I certainly don't think that these pedals do a bad job at all. I think that they definitely provide the fundamentals necessary, but I wouldn't say they quite nail it quite like what we see on some other pedal sets in this part of the market. But look, there are plenty of other pedal sets that you'll find at around this kind of price point that are absolute garbage compared to these as well. So definitely on the better side, but not as good as what you're getting with those G Pro pedals if you do want to opt for those. Remembering again, those are also compatible with all this other gear that we're looking at in today's video, and they get the job done regardless of whether you're driving on a cockpit or on the floor. So yeah, I think that's a tick in the box. Flipping over just quickly now as well, I'll just give you a quick look at the wiring here. So you can see little RJ ports that connect through to our throttle pedal. So we've got one connection for each of these pedals. And then on the far right-hand side of the pedals, you've got a little USB-C port here that will connect either directly to your PC or connect through to your wheelbase if you want to connect it that way. Now, there are a couple of differences there in terms of how they can be adjusted depending on how you have them connected, but we'll look at that in the software section. And speaking of, I think it's about time we got into the software and driving experience now. So let's jump over on the rig and talk more about the setup. So let's take a tour now of the Logitech G Hub software. Now this is going to be the software responsible for managing any of your Logitech G peripherals connected to your PC. So not only your keyboard and mouse, webcam and things like that if you own Logitech G products, but also of course your wheel, your base, and your pedals if you're running on PC. Now, you might be wondering what happens if you're running on console. You do have the ability to change some settings from the base itself. I'll show you that in just a moment, but you can also adjust some settings here, particularly related to pedal adjustments, and then save those settings to the pedals. Then when you use them on your console later on, those same settings will take effect. So that's a nice little touch there. Some other ecosystems like Fanatec offer something very similar. Fanatec also these days has a mobile app which you can install, which will allow you to adjust settings on the fly without even needing to go into the PC at all. So that is quite handy, not something that's offered within the Logitech ecosystem just yet, but hopefully something we might see into the future. So let's start off here by clicking on RS50, and this is going to bring up our settings pertaining to the wheelbase and the wheel that is connected to your wheelbase. Now, before we get into these settings here, I want to show you how this correlates with what you have access to on the screen here. So at the moment, you can see by default, we're shown a graph with our current clutch, brake, gas, and handbrake inputs. And at the moment, because I've got the pedals connected to the PC, when I push those pedals, we don't actually see any reading there at all. Now, there is a very good reason why I've connected the pedals directly to the PC. And it's kind of related to what we were just talking about before with settings, but I will explain it in more detail when we get to pedals in just a moment. But if we press on the little tuning menu button here, like what we have on Fanatec, you can see straight away, it pops up on the screen, please close settings screen on your RS50 in order to continue making changes to your profile. So it doesn't let you have a mismatch between what you're doing on the base and the software, but you can see here at the moment, we've got the G Hub profile selected. So that means it's running whatever profile you have set in the software there. If you click in on that using the little thumb wheel here, you can now choose between 5 different presets, which are actually saved on the base itself. So if we go back to G Hub just for now and confirm here, exit back out of the menu for now and click back on RS50, you'll notice up here, we've got a little button that says onboard memory mode off. If we click that on, now we're actually able to make changes to the profiles that are actually saved in the Wheelbase itself. So if you want to set up different profiles for different sim racing titles and then quickly switch between those profiles without having to go into the software, you can do that here. So you just select which profile you want, and then you can make all the adjustments either in the software here or on the Wheelbase itself. So if you just quickly go back into here again, I'll show you how these adjustments can be made. So we can make an adjustment to our strength by clicking on the thumb wheel, winding the strength all the way up or all the way down, and clicking again when we're happy with it. Our Trueforce level as well, so that can be wound all the way up to 100. I definitely wouldn't recommend you do that, and we'll explain why when we get into driving a little bit later on. But once you've set that and you're happy, you can click again. Force feedback filter, up and down. Our angle adjustment, which I did find I had to adjust quite frequently here, unlike with some other ecosystems. I'm thinking they'll probably refine this over time with newer drivers, but I did find there were quite a few instances where the wheel angle didn't match what was happening inside the game. So I did have to go in and adjust this. As you can see here, we can adjust between all the way down to 90 degrees, not that you would ever go that low. The lowest I've ever seen anybody need to run is about 360 for Formula One style games, but that will crank all the way up to 2,700 degrees of rotation. So if you're driving truck sims or anything like that, you're absolutely going to be covered here. But let's wind that back down to a more sensible 900 just for now. And we click again and we're all good. RPM mode, so this will change the behavior of the RPM strip. RPM brightness, reset all of our settings as well. And then we get down into Wheelbase settings. We can change what we want to have displayed on our home screen. So that display that I was talking about before with the little graph, we can change between a dynamic mode, a test mode, the different profiles that we might have selected, a torque reading, and back to dynamic mode again. So we're going to leave it on dynamic for now. We can switch between compatibility modes here too. So if you have a title that isn't compatible with the RS base, you can actually switch it across to G Pro mode, and that will get you up and running. Haven't needed to make use of that. And we did test this across pretty much every single title that is available right now, but your mileage may vary there. So it's good that they have that mode. Then we also have a platform selection here as well. So by default with the on startup selected, when you connect a new wheel, by default, it'll ask you what platform you're going to be operating on. So it'll ask you to choose whether you want PS5, PS4, PC, or Xbox, if you've got an Xbox compatible wheel, like what we discussed a little bit earlier on. And as you mentioned earlier, but just in case you skipped over that part, if you do have the PlayStation compatible base and you pair it with an Xbox compatible wheel, you then have compatibility across all platforms, Xbox, PC, and PS4 or PS5. So you can have it automatically prompt you every time you connect a new wheel, or if you're only ever going to be running on one particular platform, you can just hard code that in by choosing one of these, and then it won't prompt you every time you connect a new wheel. But I'm going to leave that on startup for now. And then we also just have a readout for our firmware versions for the various different devices connected to our ecosystem as well for quick reference. So pretty much all the obvious bases there covered, pretty much the same kind of idea as what we have within the Fanatec ecosystem, if you're familiar with that. But we're going to jump back out of the menu now, and we'll go back to the software on our PC. And you can see all those same settings are replicated here in visual form. So we've got an adjustment here for our operating range, steering sensitivity, like what we discussed before, from 90 degrees all the way up to 2,700. So then below that, we've got our dampener setting, which will allow us to make the wheel feel more smooth in general. Now, in general, this is an extremely smooth wheelbase. So I never felt the need under any circumstance to run more than about 10. In most cases, just leaving it at 0 was absolutely fine for me. But if you are finding that some of the more granular detail is just a little bit too grainy or robotic for you, and I don't think you will, but you do have the ability to crank this up. And unlike some other wheelbases that we've tested in this kind of area of the market, it doesn't introduce a lot of noise or other unwanted artifacts. It does seem to be a really pure filter, so a good integration there. We then have our strength adjustment. So at the moment, you can see we've got it cranked all the way up to the maximum of 8 Newton meters. Under most circumstances, this kind of strength level, you're probably going to want to run this at 8. The only real exception to that would be if you are having small children run on your rig. 8 Newton meters is enough to break a finger or even a wrist or an arm of a small child. So you definitely don't want to muck around with that. It certainly isn't a toy. But yeah, under other circumstances, I would generally recommend have this cranked all the way up to the maximum. This allows you to make full use of all the dynamic range available on the wheelbase, so you're not compressing the signals down and compromising the fidelity and dynamic range of the wheelbase. So leave that set up to the maximum. Then we have a force feedback filter. Now there's not a whole lot of documentation on exactly how this works, but it seems to be an interpolation filter which works in very similar ways on other ecosystems as well. So the higher you crank this up, the more it kind of just filters the signal and smooth things out. So it kind of works a little bit like the dampener, but it's accounting more for lower sample rates that might be coming out of some sims. So if there's larger gaps between packets of data, then this can sort of fill in the gaps with artificially created or interpolated data in between. But again, under most circumstances, I didn't feel the need to run this higher than about 2. And you do have the option here for automatic force feedback filter as well, which did seem to do a pretty good job. And one of the things that's always been a strength of the Logitech ecosystem across all their racing products is the consistency between different sim racing titles. You find that if you jump into a GT3 car in iRacing and then jump into the same type of car in Assetto Corsa Competizione or something like Le Mans Ultimate, they do fundamentally feel very similar to drive, and that can't be said for some other ecosystems that do require a lot more adjustment and filtering to get them to feel fundamentally the same. Now, obviously, there are nuances and subtle differences between the different sims and how they represent force feedback, but you want a GT3 car to feel relatively consistently like a GT3 car as you jump between different sim titles, and this does a good job of that. So then lastly, below that, we've got an adjustment here for Trueforce. Now this does wind all the way up to 100, but I would actually recommend that if you buy one of these, start off with Trueforce turned off, feel what the raw force feedback feels like, and then start to introduce a little bit of Trueforce over the top of that as you start to get used to it. I found that under 10% was about the sweet spot for me. A lot of sims I was running about 5%. So if you crank this up all the way, you are just gonna feel crazy vibrations through the wheelbase, and it's gonna pull all the fidelity away from the details that you actually need to drive quickly and consistently. So you're not gonna feel things like tire wall flex and suspension movement bumping up over rumble strips and things like that. So it is definitely a fine line here between something that adds more immersion and something that just gives you sensory overload and actually pulls away from the driving experience. So start off low or off, and then work your way up until you find the sweet spot for you. Then you've got a button here to reset to default settings if you want to. So you're probably thinking at this point, there's not a whole lot of adjustment available here, and that might be compelling to some people. I know a lot of people that this kind of product is targeting, other kinds of people that just want to be able to plug it in and drive and not have to worry about all these masses of filters and settings. And I know a lot of people do find those settings quite overwhelming in other ecosystems. Now, what I would ultimately like is the ability to actually access some more filters for those power users that actually want to do so. Asetek, I think, have done a good job of this with their Ignition range, which is also an entry-level direct drive wheelbase, comparable in a lot of ways to what we have here. They actually have an advanced tab that unlocks all of those advanced filters should you wish to fiddle around with them and really dial in the force feedback to be exactly what you want. So you are a little bit hamstrung with this. I think they have done a really good job of the feeling out of the box, but we'll get into that more in the driving experience in just a moment. But based on what we have in terms of adjustment here for force feedback, I think you can probably see where I'm going with this. There are other products on the market that I think are more suitable to the purists that really want to fine tune things, whereas this is very much a product that's aimed at people that just want a great experience out of the box, and this absolutely does provide that. But let's just jump quickly back out again now and click on RS pedals. Now you remember earlier I said that I had the pedals connected to the PC rather than directly to the base for a reason. When you have the pedals connected through the wheelbase, you actually have an additional setting here on the wheelbase through that menu that we looked at before to adjust your brake sensitivity, but you don't have the ability to adjust things like curves and so forth. So if you wanted to make those more fine-tuning adjustments, you will need to have the pedals connected to your PC, remembering that you can then save those settings, connect back to your wheelbase, and it will give you the ability to use those settings whilst being connected all through the one module here. So for the purpose of this video, I've got it connected to the PC just so you can see all the setting adjustments here. So let's jump in and take a look at these pedal settings now. So we've got the usual suspects here. We've got an option here to combine pedals on one axis if you need to for some more basic racing titles. I couldn't find an example of anything that required this, but you may have some older obscure title that does need it, so it's always a good option to have. Below that, we've got our clutch, brake, and accelerator sensitivity. There's also an advanced button for each one of these. So as default, as we go through the scale here, 0, you can see I have to push the pedal down quite far before it starts giving me a reading, and then towards the end, it kind of just races away. So it's a non-linear curve that starts off shallow and then progresses up. On the flip side, if we go to 100, you can see it goes really fast at the start and then slow towards the end. So it's more like that. 50% in the middle here would be our linear response. And that works exactly the same way for all three pedals. If we click on the advanced tab here, so we might do this for the throttle because that's where I would recommend it's likely to be most useful, given that the clutch pedal here doesn't have a mechanical rollover point as we discussed earlier on in the hardware look. So we click on advanced. Now you can see instead of that arbitrary scale that we had before, we have an option of high, low, and linear response. And then if we click on the three-dot menu here and click on view sensitivity curve, this is something that they've added in the software just recently. So we can click on our high, and this gives you a visual representation of what we were talking about before, low or linear response. And you can also add your own custom curves here as well. So what that allows you to do is grab each node and move it around to map the response that you want for each one of your three pedals. So if you're driving something like an MX-5, for example, and you want to have the throttle come on really aggressively to get out of corners as quickly as possible, you might want to run something that looks like high. So you can see it's getting on the throttle nice and quickly. Conversely, if you're driving something like a 911 Cup car, for example, rear engine, rear wheel drive, no traction control, you might find that you're spinning on corner exit a lot because you're too aggressive on the throttle. Now, I would always recommend adjust your driving habits rather than using something like this to account for bad habits. But if you are just having problems with that, you can map a nonlinear response like this. And now you can see the throttle comes on a lot less aggressively in that initial phase and then goes on very aggressively towards the end. So yeah, this is a new thing in the G Hub software. Even though I don't personally run nonlinear curves, a lot of people like to. So it's good to have those options, and particularly the ability to fine tune and adjust to your heart's content. But we're gonna set all of these back to 50 for now. And yeah, you can see down below that we then have our brake force adjustment. This is the adjustment I was talking about before that you can adjust from the wheelbase if you have the pedals connected through the wheelbase. This is basically just how sensitive your brake pedal is. Now you already saw the mechanical adjustments that you have before with the elastomers. This is essentially just amplifying or attenuating the signal from the load cell. So at minimum force here, 1%, you can see it's extremely sensitive. Basically, as soon as you put your foot on the brake at all, it's just jumping straight to 100%. Don't ever do that. If we crank it all the way up to 100%, even though it's a 70 kilogram load cell, I have to push on that as hard as I possibly can. There we go, I got it to 100%. But that would have probably been, even though, like I said before, even though it's a 70 kilogram load cell, I reckon that was probably more like 120 kilograms of actual force required at the face of the pedal to get that to read at its maximum full scale deflection. So most people, I don't think anybody's gonna need to brake anywhere near that. But as we discussed before, it's all about having that clearly defined threshold point in your braking. And this does give you the ability, in conjunction with the mechanical adjustments that we looked at before, to dial things in. Somewhere around the 30 to 40% mark, I think is gonna be right for most people. That allows you to hit that threshold point, and you can see I'm braking at around the 80% mark there, and then I can modulate my braking input and trail brake off as I enter the apex, following the rules of the traction circle. So as you trail brake, as you add more steering angle, you want to taper off on the brake pedal so you're not asking too much of the tires in any one direction, laterally or longitudinally. So that allows you to dial that in nice and accurately. And then once you've made all these adjustments, you click on Save to Device. That will flash it to the pedals, and then you can either connect it back through your wheelbase or connect over to your console, and all those settings will carry across and you'll be good to go. So that is pretty much everything I think you need to know about the software. There are a couple of additional adjustments in here for things like lighting for your RPM strip, but it's very basic stuff here. You've got an adjustment for your brightness. You've got an adjustment for whether you want the RPM strip to go left to right, right to left, inside out, outside in, and then some custom profiles here as well that you can edit just to, you know, customize it and make it look the way you want to, but all pretty basic stuff here, stuff that we see in most ecosystems these days. So I think that's everything you need to know, at least for this video, for the software. So now that you understand what these products are all about, let's talk about the all-important driving experience. I want to start this off a little bit differently, just talking about what it's actually like to sit down in the rig with all of this gear on it, because that's probably the first thing that really struck me here. Just the overall sense of quality and presentation is higher than other competitive products that sit within this kind of market segment. I would say, just with the exception of if you're using a Fanatec CSL DD or GT DD Pro with one of their more high-end wheels, of course. But otherwise speaking, nothing else in this kind of segment of the market gives you that same sensation of quality when you sit down in the rig. And I think that that's really important because, you know, when you're spending this much money on a sim racing rig, you want to feel like you've got something special and something high end. So I definitely don't think that that should be understated. Ergonomics of the wheels, as we've mentioned before, is very good. Everything is relatively nice and reachable. And I do like the fact that the bundle comes with a button plate that you can actually upgrade with other rims if you want to. But the rim that it comes with by default is a relatively low diameter and nice smooth round wheel. That makes it very versatile. I use this thing, as you can see in the driving footage here, from everything from Formula One style driving all the way through to drifting. It's small and nimble enough that it does feel precise if you're driving Formula style cars, and it's smooth enough that if you're drifting or doing anything like that, rally driving and so forth, it is absolutely fine as well. So a very versatile wheel here. And then of course you do have the option of switching it out with a larger diameter or something more like this, or one of those McLaren wheels that we were talking about earlier on as well. Yeah, you've got plenty of options there. Not as many options as you have in other ecosystems, but certainly, you know, they are progressing in the right direction there. And all of the offerings that they have within the ecosystem are all equal in quality, at least for the first party hardware. And, you know, then you've got third party stuff on top of that as well. So overall, the wheels do provide a very good driving experience. In particular, I'd say the shifters are a standout feature. And again, the quality that we have here is exactly the same. They're literally the same wheels that you have for use in the G Pro ecosystem, which is a lot more expensive. So you're getting that premium experience, even though you're paying a lower overall price or a lower barrier to entry in the first place. So yeah, good job with the wheels, but just not quite the diversity of ecosystem that we see elsewhere, which of course is more important in the context of console usage than it is in the context of PC, where you can use any wheel you want. So then we get into the actual experience of driving the car. And the thing that struck me again here was just the overall sense of refinedness immediately out of the box. Now, you saw in the software section earlier that there isn't a whole lot of adjustability here. And I know, and I've said this to Logitech multiple times now, that this is going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. There are a lot of purists out there that want that granular fine control of every little aspect of what the motor and the firmware is doing. And look, this just isn't going to give you that. It's what it does give you is an absolutely fantastic out of the box driving experience. But I kind of, in my mind, I think back to our review that we did of the SimMagic Evo series just recently. And when we reviewed those products, the driving experience was absolutely excellent. And then a couple of other reviews came out about a month or so later. They'd done a firmware update and they'd actually fundamentally changed the feeling of those wheelbases. And all of a sudden it went from a subjectively great experience to a subjectively bad experience. And then they had to go back in and adjust the firmware again. So a lot of people's feedback throughout that whole saga was, we don't want manufacturers telling us how our driving experience should feel. We want to be able to have that choice for ourselves. Now, there are always going to be elements within the firmware that you don't have access to. You know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that is beyond just the filters that we see, even in the most high-end and most adjustable wheelbases. But at a fundamental level, you don't have a lot of granular control over the kind of sensations that you get out of this wheelbase. So you do get very, very smooth force feedback. There's not a hint of roboticness or, you know, any sort of notching or anything like that. It feels very authentic. The level of detail is there and is very, very good as well. So I think that, you know, the balance that they've struck there straight out of the box is phenomenally good, to be honest with you guys. And, you know, Tom and I both said after spending multiple hours driving with this thing that we would have absolutely no hesitation in running this on either of our daily driver rigs. But if you are one of those purists that wants that granular control, unfortunately you just don't have that in this ecosystem. So just like what we've come to expect from Logitech, the driving experience across the board was very consistent. We did test this in, you know, a whole bunch of different arcade style games. I tested Wreckfest 2, I did Simcade like F125 for example, all the way through to hardcore simulators like iRacing, Le Mans Ultimate and so forth. The only one that we had any drama with was Assetto Corsa Competizione, which has an issue with the scaling of the steering angle. So at the moment you have to set it to 200% scaling to get a 1-to-1 rotation. It's still not quite 1-to-1, but unfortunately there's some sort of an issue there in the driver at the moment that Kudos need to put some effort into fixing up to make that work. Now at the moment I understand that they're pretty focused on Assetto Corsa Evo, which does work perfectly fine. So I don't know how long it's going to be. So if you are a hardcore ACC enthusiast, you might want to just sort of sit on the fence on this one for a little while and see how it plays out, because I don't think that Kunos are putting a lot of effort into ACC these days, so it might be quite some time before that's fixed. But maybe I'm wrong and it'll be fixed by the time you're seeing this video. I just don't know at this point in time. But look, that was the only instance where we came across any drama at all. Otherwise, just like what you would expect from Logitech, the integration and I guess the clout that they have within the gaming space means that they are able to have that deeper level of integration. And even when it comes to things like Trueforce, you know, you can see for yourselves, I'll link down in the description below for you the list of supported games with Trueforce. Now, as I mentioned before, you know, the API integration doesn't necessarily mean a consistent experience across the board when it comes to Trueforce. It is purely down to the game developer's integration there. But you know, in all the major sim titles, the experience is relatively consistent and no other manufacturer has that level of integration at this point in time. Even on Fanatec's more high-end stuff like the CS-DD and DD Plus, you know, those products have been out for almost 2 years now and they've only just gotten API integration for full force in iRacing. They still don't have it in any other game, at least to my knowledge at the time of recording this. So yeah, Logitech are definitely a step ahead there when it comes to Trueforce. And a lot of people thought that Trueforce was a gimmick when it was first released with the G923, and I tended to agree with you. When it was released with the G Pro, that was when we started to really understand what it was capable of, and it is the same experience here, just not quite as strong with the RS50. So yeah, I would say if you've had a drive of a G Pro in the past and maybe liked the driving experience but were just turned off by that ridiculous form factor, then this does feel a little bit weaker than the G Pro does. But in my case, at least, I'd be willing to make that sacrifice for the better form factor. So look, at this point in time, I think the G Pro was a difficult recommendation given its price point for console players. I feel like the benefits that you're getting in terms of the force feedback quality do diminish when you're playing on console because the force feedback detail just isn't as detailed to begin with. So I always had a hard time recommending it for console users unless money just wasn't a thing for you. And it's similar with the Fanatec CS-DD and DD Plus. You know, that high-end stuff is objectively the best stuff you can get for console at this point in time, but whether you should actually spend that kind of money on a console in the first place, I would say is debatable because the experience is, you know, objectively, you know, more versatile on a PC than it is on a console. But that said, there are a lot of people that are still playing on consoles and that is absolutely fine too. So in conclusion, what is my recommendation here? And look, it is very nuanced. There isn't really a right answer here. I would say, first and foremost, if you're a console sim racer, I have a hard time recommending something like the CS-DD, DD Plus and G Pro, simply because they are so expensive. They're so high end that, you know, you are starting to get into the territory of diminishing return. I think that a product like this is much more suited to that style of racing, because my recommendation would be, if you're going to spend more than this, you should be putting that money towards a PC anyway, because PC just does objectively give you much more versatility when it comes to what you can do in sim racing. You've got open world sims, you've got mods, you've got a much larger online community outside of things like GT5, for example, and it's just a better experience objectively overall. I'm sure I'm getting absolutely roasted in the comments for saying that, but a lot of you guys will agree with me on that as well. So yeah, I just don't feel comfortable recommending anything more expensive than this, you know, specifically for console use. I think it does an absolutely fantastic, phenomenal job of that. And look, I think it does an absolutely fantastic, phenomenal job on PC as well. Across the whole board here, I think the pedals do everything that they need to do. They're certainly not the best pedals that I've tested in this price bracket. That would be the Asetek Annouceds that we just tested recently, as you heard me say. But I would say these are probably the second best. And yeah, if you're on PC, you can use whatever pedals you want, so you don't necessarily need to go for these anyway. I just don't think they quite have the level of precision that you get in other options. And, you know, I would rather save a little bit on the wheelbase, go with something like this, rather than something like, you know, the more expensive stuff, and put that money towards pedals, which are ultimately more important to driving quickly and consistently than the wheelbase is. The integration that we have here with Trueforce means that you do get that extra layer of force feedback across a wider range of sim racing titles on PC as well as consoles than what you do in any other ecosystem, and particularly at this price point, because the only real competitor to this at the moment is Fanatec's Full Force, and that isn't available on the CSL-DD and GT DD Pro only. They're more high-end CS-DD and DD Plus. So this definitely provides, in my opinion, the highest quality force feedback in this price bracket right now. But in saying that, it doesn't quite give you the tunability as we discussed before. So if you're the sort of person that really values the raw driving experience and really wants to be able to fine tune and tweak every single element of that, then this probably isn't the wheelbase for you, I would say. Factoring in the wider ecosystem as well, you are more limited in your selection of wheels and things like shifters within this ecosystem than you are with others. Although, of course, on PC, you can just use any wheel or any pedals or shifter or whatever you want. So that's not such a big deal, but I know that will be a limiting factor for some people that like to keep things simple and straightforward. Fanatec definitely do have the upper hand when it comes to, you know, the expanse of accessories. You know, SimMagic have a lot of offerings there as well. You know, you can check out our direct drive buyer's guide for a breakdown of all of these different brands and, you know, where their strengths and weaknesses are. But I guess the point here is that, you know, the raw driving experience isn't the be all and end all these days when it comes to this segment of the market. There are a lot of options here. It does ultimately come down to your personal preference and what you place the most value in. It, you know, there is a lot to be said for a, you know, a clean driving experience. You just plug it in, it just works. All the buttons map cleanly. It's just simple. And a lot of people will place more value in that than they will on certain other elements. Although at the end of the day, it tends to, on paper at least, all come down to things like strength and slew rate and so forth. But yeah, I would say this is probably a bit like an Apple product in that as long as you like what it does, it's absolutely fantastic. But if you don't quite like what it does, or you don't quite like the limitations that are imposed by the software, then maybe you'd be better off elsewhere. And yeah, I think that's probably the best advice I can give you there. It is a very, very, very saturated part of the market now, and there isn't really a right or wrong decision. So I really hope that all the things that we've covered objectively in today's video have given you a better understanding of whether this might be the right product for you. And again, I would definitely recommend go check out other people's reviews of this as well. I'm sure there'll be plenty launching at the same time as this one's going live. We do have detailed reviews of all the other options that we discussed today over on boostedmedia.net or right here on our YouTube channel, as well as our comparison chart on our direct drive buyer's guide as well. So amongst all those resources, I think you should have everything you need to make the right choice for you. But look, again, there really isn't a wrong choice these days. Everything in this market segment is good. It just comes down to little nuances. So yeah, I definitely think they've done an outstanding job here. The only thing that holds me back is just that limitation in terms of tuning. And it's as simple as that. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If you've enjoyed the video, please do leave a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, let us know what you think as well. And yeah, if you're looking at picking up this gear or any other sim racing gear, head over to boostedmedia.net where you will find all the latest discount codes and our affiliate links. Again, an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media without it costing you an extra cent and potentially saving yourselves a little bit of money in the process. Again, we do have that 5% discount code for all of the Logitech G gear, including all this and their keyboards, mice, accessories, and so forth. So make use of that. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.